Bonjour et bienvenue à l'ILARA, l'Institut des langues rares de l'École pratique des hautes études PSL. Hello and welcome to ILARA, our institute whose aim is to showcase the rare and precious ancient and contemporary languages of the world. Felix Ameka's talk will be in English, but I'll introduce our institute in French first. L'ILARA est un institut créé en août 2020 par arrêté du ministère français de l'enseignement supérieur, de la recherche et de l'innovation. Sa mission est de sensibiliser et de former le grand public aux langues rares, anciennes et contemporaines, et à leur culture. L'ILARA participe aussi à la valorisation et la sauvegarde de ces langues à travers des actions de documentation. Deux offres principales sont actuellement disponibles pour tous les publics. D'une part, une offre de cours d'initiation, de découverte et d'approfondissement en présentiel à Paris et étant donné la situation en visioconférence. Vous y trouverez par exemple du géorgien classique, du grec ancien, ainsi qu'un cycle sur la diversité des langues africaines qui comprend le gbaya, les créoles à base portugaise d'Afrique occidentale, les langues des monts Nuba et les langues bantoues. Et d'autre part, une offre de vidéoconférence virtuelle, l'ILARA en ligne, disponible sur notre chaîne et dont la première série, les invitations de l'ILARA, met à l'honneur des spécialistes de renommée internationale sous forme d'entretien ou de conférences. Dans ce cadre de l'ILARA en ligne, nous avons accueilli il y a 15 jours Scott Delancey qui nous a fait découvrir les subtilités des langues d'Asie. La semaine dernière, c'était Nicholas Evans qui nous initiait aux complexités de la langue aborigène d'Australie, le dalabon. Et cette semaine, nous continuons notre tour du monde des langues rares avec Felix Ameka, qui s'apprête à nous présenter quelques joyaux linguistiques des langues d'Afrique de l'Ouest. Titulaire de la chaire de vitalité et diversité ethnolinguistique dans le monde à l'Université de Leiden, aux Pays-Bas, Felix Ameka est un linguiste dont le domaine d'expertise et de prédilection est l'intersection entre grammaire, culture et cognition. Locuteur d'Ewe, une langue parlée au Ghana et au Togo, et ayant poursuivi des études jusqu'à la licence à l'université de Legon au Ghana, Felix Ameka connaît intimement cette région de l'Afrique et les cultures et les langues qui s'y côtoient, ce qui lui a permis d'en analyser la sémantique et la pragmatique de manière fine et détaillée. Il a notamment contribué à remettre à l'honneur des parties de discours longtemps considérées comme périphériques, parce qu'inconnues des langues européennes, comme les idéophones. Il est actuellement engagé dans un projet collaboratif de documentation des langues des monts Ghana-Togo, dans leurs écologies multilingues, afin de mieux comprendre à travers les traces d'origine commune et de contact, l'histoire complexe de ces divers groupes et leur affiliation à la famille Kwa des langues Niger-Congo. Aujourd'hui, Felix Ameka va nous montrer à quel point les langues d'Afrique de l'Ouest ont contribué et continue de contribuer à une meilleure compréhension de ce qui passionne linguistes et anthropologues, la façon dont la faculté humaine de langage se décline à travers les langues en une myriade de possibilités, toutes plus passionnantes les unes que les autres. N'hésitez pas à lui poser vos questions en français ou en anglais à travers le chat en direct. Welcome to you all, and please ask your questions in the live chat. Share your comments and participate. We'll gather your questions and ask them to Felix Ameka at the end of his presentation. Felix, we're very happy to welcome you to ILARA. Many thanks for accepting our invitation to present the languages of West Africa to the general public, underline their genius and contribution to language sciences, and uncover the gems that are in the details.
Thank you very much, Amina. Thank you for inviting me, and I hope I will be able to tell you a little about the details that for me are the precious things that contribute to our understanding of the genius of these languages. It's not going to be an apologetic thing. I'm going to be pointing out how we endanger our understanding of the genius of these languages from our practices of describing and documenting them, in the hope that we can improve those practices and then get to the gems that are underlying the edifice that we try to crack. So without much ado, I'm going to share my screen and we will begin. Okay. So what I'm going to try to do today is to sensitize us to some of the ways in which we do our descriptions and so on, and in a way that leads to false impressions about the languages. And the gems are really hidden under these languages. And in a way, I am using the term gem because when I was invited to this series, the idea is that we want to think about languages as being so precious. And that precious aspect of it is what I'm trying to bring out. And of course, I don't have the whole time, so I'm going to be only pointing out a couple of things. But why is this a problem? Part of the problem is that our descriptive practices do not approach the languages from their internal logic. We do not allow the languages to speak. And why do I say that? Because we base our analysis and our generalizations not on all of the data, which goes to present a partial picture. And our analyses are also many times based on translations of the languages into the meta language of our description. And what is worse, when we put these things down, people who are interested in cross-linguistic studies, typologies, they take these generalizations, they take these things that we have and take them away to put the languages into typologies. And this leads to false typological claims about the languages. So my goal is to show that the analysis of three themes that I'll be pointing out and how we can pay attention to the details. And once we pay attention to the details, we might come to a different view of some of the claims that are made about these languages in the literature. So the first detail that I'm going to be talking about is there are no weather verbs in West African littoral languages. But if there are no weather verbs like to rain, to dew, to all the weather verbs that we get in the standard average European languages, which do not exist in these languages, the question that has to be asked is, how do speakers of these languages talk about weather and environmental and ambient conditions? And what are the implications of this for typological patterns of meteorological event descriptions? You will get a bit of a snapshot which will tell you that actually, even though I say that there are no weather verbs in West African littoral languages, some of the languages might have one verb of weather type, but the majority do not have weather verbs. Nevertheless, if you take any description of some of these languages, you will get verbs being translated as weather verbs. Rain is a very common one, and we'll see some examples of the false translations that take place. The second detail that I'll briefly touch on is about the notions of the day before today and the notions of the day after today, which are coded as a unitary concept. The question is, what is the semantics of these words? And the point here is that, there's been always discussions on the linguistic typology list, for example. This issue came up and it was presented as if in these languages that have this kind of coding pattern, these words are polysemous. And I'm going to be arguing that actually we can only think of them as polysemous if we are thinking of translation equivalence. And this has further implications for studies of cross-linguistic semantics, especially these days when we are talking about co-lexification or co-expression of the same idea in a form. To what extent are we going to say that these are distinct notions that are co-lexified in a lexical item versus that we have a unitary concept, which from the speaker's point of view is just not two different notions. Then the third little thing that I'm going to be talking about, and it may seem specific, but it is a very important illustration of how some of these problems continue. So not too long ago, in 2019, there was a linguistic typology list discussion of singulative. I'll give you more details about it later. And in that discussion, Silva, who put up the discussion, listed Ewe as one of those languages in which there is a diminutive used, actually in which there is a singulative. And when I read that and saw that, I was struck. So I contacted her and asked, okay, so what is the diminutive, what is the singulative in Ewe? And then she came back to me saying she got it from Jafarski's study of the semantics of the diminutive. And in that study, Jafarski talks about the diminutive as a partitive meaning, having a partitive function, and that partitive function is like the singulative. And lo and behold, when Jafarski is talking about this, he makes use of an Ewe example from Heine et al.'s discussion of grammaticalization of the word child of to a diminutive in Ewe. And in the sense that the diminutive as a singulative has this partitive meaning, Silva Numio interprets it as a singulative. So this is why Ewe ends up on the list as having a singulative. But it is not the form, the diminutive, that is the singulative. I'll probably briefly point out later on that there is a singulative in Ewe, which is sort of related to the diminutive, but it is not a diminutive. It is the word qui, which has to do with a grain or something. And you can use that as a diminutive. And I'll show you some examples as a singulative. And I'll show you some examples of how that works as a singulative. So those are the three kinds of things I'm going to talk about. And I hope my introducing the topics this way already points to part of my bias in how I'm going to talk about these things, so to say. It's not a bias, it is just, I think there is a problem and we have to think about how we do things better. So that is just the Gulf of Guinea, and I'm going to be talking a lot about these Kwa languages, some of them, the Gbe languages spoken down there, and then we'll get to the Ghana-Togo Mountain languages, etc. Okay, so now we go to some typological claims that have been made about meteorological expressions. one of the things that is said is basically that indeed, in the eyes of linguists, expressions about nature, the weather and so on are as problematic and ill-behaved as the weather itself. So this is what Ameka says, which was quoted in the studies of the typology of weather phenomenon by Erickson and al. In 2010. Now, one of the things that is also said, and because that is how it is in the European languages, so you talk about it is raining, it is snowing, it is so and so. So we talk about these expressions as impersonal constructions. And so there is a whole class of impersonal constructions or constructions that are treated as impersonal. The meteorological ones are the first ones, the existential sentences, the experiential sentences, etc., etc. And of course, this is where we go to the extraposition transformation that was introduced long time ago in generative grammar. The point to make about this is, first of all, that in most West African languages, meteorological and existential constructions tend not to be impersonal. So already we want to be asking, if they are not using impersonal constructions, what are they using? And I must point out that this observation has long been made in the 80s by Koopman with respect to the Ivorian languages. So just to give you an example of how this is expressed, we have this expression for the sky opens fire. That is the literal meaning of the expression that you use to talk about there was lightning. And I try to show I try to give you this idea that if you think about the French or the English, you do have a kind of impersonal construction, but in Ewe, it is a transitive clause with a subject, which is the sky, with a verb, which is open, and with a theme object, fire. And I say it this way just to say that we can show evidence of the grammatical relations, the grammatical functions of the sky and of fire as object and as subject from the language internal point of view, not from the point of view of the translation of the utterance, so to say. So some of these properties, if you think about the standard average European sort of expressions, you're going to be faced with the thing that it follows from the fact that they are impersonal subjects. Two things: that meteorological expressions involve non-referential subjects, and there's a whole debate about it, and that their subjects are non-canonical. And we can go back to Chomsky introducing this it as a quasi argument long ago. But, and Cressel's commenting with respect to impersonal constructions talks about the fact that it's hardly disputable that the verbs that they are involved occur also in canonical constructions. The syntactic particularities of meteorological impersonals are of an argument structure that does not involve a canonical subject. Well, I would say that the kinds of subjects you get in the West African languages that I'm talking about are canonical. Of course, this follows. So remember, I am talking about the fact that these languages do not have weather verbs. So we shouldn't expect them to behave with impersonals or anything. However, when we do our typological claims about things, we include them in these things. This is where the problem is. So just to throw up a debate that is long in the literature is about whether this it in this, so it is raining kind of thing, is referential or not. So Chaire, in a classic book on the meaning, the structure of meaning in 1970, talks about them, these kinds of constructions with the it, as representing all encompassing states. And he continues, they need not reflect anything at all in the semantic structure, by which he implies that they are not referential. The subject themselves, the it, is not referential. Dwight Bollinger, one of my heroes, comes back in his book. Actually, he published this paper on the ambient it long before putting it in a book in 1977, the book Form and Meaning, which is a classic that people should all read. He thinks that whether it has a referent, and in this case, precisely the environment that is central to the whole area. So the referent in this case is precisely the environment. And so he asserts that ambient it is meaningful too. Ambient it is referential. So now let me just go to talk a little bit about some of the coding strategies that were proposed by Erickson et al. As a kind of typology. And I do have this here, but I'm going to skip those tables and just go to the coding strategy typology. They argue that you have a predicate type where the meteorological event is encoded as a predicate, and where any eventual argument is either semantically empty or irrelevant to expressing the event as such. So this is like if you have rain, which is a verb, to rain. So if you say it rains, the it, remember, it's impersonal, it's non-referential. So they say it's semantically empty or irrelevant to expressing the events. The second type is what they call the argument type. And I put this one in bold because they attribute some West African languages to this type. And they say that this is where the meteorological event is encoded as an argument, and where the predicate is largely semantically irrelevant to expressing the event as such, and functions more as a supporting verb. The problem is with the West African kinds of predications that we are going to be seeing, the predicate is largely not semantically irrelevant. The meteorological event is not necessarily encoded in an argument. It might be that there is a phenomenon that is encoded as the argument, but it has to go with the verb to be able to express something about the condition that we are talking about as the meteorological condition. Then there is the argument predicate type, where the meteorological event is encoded in the form of a predicate and an argument simultaneously. So in that case, you have both an argument and a predicate expressing it. Then as subtypes of these, you've got the intransitive argument type, which has one argument and a predicate, where the argument denotes a meteorological event, like if you were to say the snow falls or something. The predicate is semantically superfluous. That is, it's grammatically required, and the number of verbs appearing as predicates is limited. Then the verb is semantically less specific in meteorological concepts, but used in other contexts. So the verb will be a specific verb as far as meteorology is concerned, but it may be used in other contexts. There is a mix and mash of this in many of the languages. So one of the examples they give is taken from the Grammar of Fon-français by Lefebvre and Brousseau. And that, so now we are into the West African languages proper. So Fon-français is one of the Gbe languages. It's the relative of Ewe, Gen, Aja, and actually this example, Jija. Now, Jija is glossed as rain falls, and this is taken from the grammar, and is translated as it is raining. So the way Erickson et al. Interpret this is that there is a nominal element which refers to a meteorological event, rain, as the exemplified case. So rain, they are saying G is rain, and that is the element that is coding the meteorological event. I want to say that there are parallels of this construction in all the Gbe languages. You can just say something like this, Jija, and it would mean it rained or it is raining. However, I'm going to show you in a moment that G doesn't mean rain. Ja doesn't necessarily really mean fall. So what am I talking about? So G does not refer to a meteorological event. It refers to the sky. You remember the sky opens fire, the Efe expression. You have G there. This is the same G which is here. Then the verb ja is not superfluous, and it does not mean fall. And the number of verbs appearing in this context is not as limited as is suggested. So what is the other problem with this? The transitive argument type construction resembles, that's what they will say, transitive constructions in the language. But I'm saying that in the West African languages, they do not just resemble, they are transitive. So I told you already about the G kedzo, and the ke is an ambitransitive verb. It's got a transitive and an intransitive use, but it is a transitive construction you get. As meteorological events lack proper participants, we may predict that the transitive type is rare cross-linguistically. Well, there are a number of assumptions here that meteorological events lack participants, and there is also the assumption that the transitive type is rare cross-linguistically. And I'm suggesting that in West African languages, the transitive constructions expressing environmental conditions are not that rare. So what are these difficulties of description which lead to empirically vacuous typologies, I'm afraid to say? And here, and this is one of the problems, because if you go to the grammar itself, where that example was taken from, the very first sentence in that section by Lefebvre and Brousseau says, there are no weather verbs in Fon. That's the very first sentence in that section. Then they continue to explain weather verbs which select an explicative subject do not exist in Fongbe. And as they go on, I mentioned the name of Koopman already. Hilde Koopman points out that such verbs do not exist in West African languages. West African languages generally express various atmospheric phenomena with a construction involving verbs that occur in other contexts as well, selecting an argument occurring in subject position, which refers to a natural element. Notice it refers to a natural element and not necessarily the meteorological event. It's important to keep those things apart. So here you see this thing happening, and it's happening, and this is what Fon and many of the Gbe languages are representing. It is like the sky is doing something. And what is doing actually, and that's why I say the verb that is used there is not fall, but it is drip. Anyway, so there are many more examples of the Fongbe which relate to the meteorological events. So for rain, we've seen that one. And then the B sentence here is very interesting. La glace, which is a borrowing from French for ice, and then you say ja, and that is when you talk about it is hailing. So it is sort of glossed as fall, but whether it is fall, we will get to in a minute. Then you have the wind blow. So you've got wind and you've got blow. It is windy. Then you have hebioso, dogbe. And it's glossed as thunder, and the dogbe is presented as if it were one element, growl. Actually, the dogbe is made up of a verb do, which is like to move something to a place, and be is the voice. So the dogbe is like to send out your voice, to raise your voice, to bring out your voice, to emit your voice, so to say. Now, this hebioso is glossed here as thunder, but actually it doesn't name thunder. It is the god of thunder. And I think it's important to realize that there is a difference to say God sends out his voice versus saying it is thunder that is sending out its voice, so to say. At least even from the point of view of the belief system of these people. Then the next one is also, you see again the G, and the G is now glossed again as rain. And then there is a predication, de attend. And de attend, just like dogbe, is a verb and a noun. The verb is remove, literally, and attend is saliva. But you see, the gloss that is given in the grammar is drizzle. And unless you have the literal meaning, you would not think that there is something, you would then think there's a verb drizzle, which is like a weather verb, but it is not. So it is drizzling. It is like the sky is sending out saliva, so to say. So what are some of the analytic problems that I've been pointing out? The glosses are misleading. G is not rain, but sky. Hebioso is not thunder, but maybe thunder god. There are syntactic analytic issues, such as reflected in a gloss, which is also inadequate. I've already pointed them out. So the dogbe and the attend. And then I just want to show you here from a Fon-français dictionary of earlier times, Rousseau, where you get the sort of paraphrases, translations of these words that we've been meeting. So you get ja, and of course, yes, he also glosses it at tomber, but I prefer the gloss which he gives there as laisser couler, and that's what it is. It's laisser couler, it's not tomber. The tomber is just a consequence of the context of saying it is raining, and then it's saying, it's like rain is falling. But this is what we have. And you see, of course, in this dictionary, and that's why I just kept the dictionary as it is, because it also says Jija, and it says la pluie est tombée, okay? And il a plu. But look at the next example that is given. Nukuche dasi, where dasi is like tier, and you have the ja there again. And it says, des larmes ont coulé de mes yeux. Are they falling? Are they tombing? I wouldn't say so. This is why I prefer the couler, laisser couler. And that is very, then we have this other example, toche jasi, and oreille, mien laisser couler eau. And beautiful. But what it really means is du puits a coulé de mon oreille. So Is ja really tombé? I would say no. And then you also have jaho, ho, which is parole. So when you say jaho, then it is laisser couler parole. So it's as if, you know, you are rolling out language, speech, so to say. So the point of this is basically, of course, because we start with jija, you ask your consultants and they tell you it is raining. And then you try to put glosses on it, and then you just say the ja is fall, the G is rain. I'm afraid that is a surface problem. And the worst part of it is when that is carried on into typologies. That is my problem. And so the lesson from this is basically, let us try. You see, if you look at this representation from the dictionary, it is easier for you to see that ja is not tombé, that there is more to it, that if you look at all the context of it, then you can find a common denominator which is more exciting. And it also makes sense in the context of saying jija, which is the point of it all. So try to get a sense of what people are trying to say. And here I'm just going to go through, and maybe I shouldn't really go through this because it's the same thing like what we've just said. And here I've just glossed ja, which is the cognate form of the ja we've seen in Fon as drip. And I'm trying to say that this verb, from an Ewe point of view, has a multiple argument realization pattern. It's a one-place verb, and it can also be a three-place verb. And it occurs outside the meteorological domain. So what are some of the things I can say to you about that? So ja, you see chija, you can nominalize it, you get chijaja. So that's also to show that actually the chija is not just that there is some impersonal subject somewhere. It is a real thing that you do to any clause like that. And then you get another derivation, ajaja, where by reduplication and prefixation, you form from this dripping thing, dew. And the last example there is really to show that, yeah, I was going to try and give a picture of this, but I couldn't find an appropriate picture. But when you are making cassava dough, for example, you put it in a sack after you've sort of ground it, so to say, and then you put something heavy on it so that that heavy thing pushes the water out of the cassava thing that you've got. And what you say there is that you put the dough, you put the rock or the stone on the dough so that it drips, so that water comes out of it. And it's the same verb which we talk about when the sky is dripping, when water is dripping from. And that's the other thing. Si is just the word for water. There is no other word for rain. Si is the word for water, and it actually it's not just water. Si, you might say, is for fluid or liquid. And depending on how you use it in context, you get these different interpretations. So it's important to be clear about the semantics of the words that are involved, and then we can do it. Yes, and here's a third example where I was saying that there is a three-place use of the verb ja. So a cultural activity, at least that used to be done. These days, not many people have earthen stoves in their homes. But if you have an earthen stove at home, every morning, you will have to, quote unquote, paint it. You have to, there's some paint, some clay thing on it, such that you can make it beautiful before you set fire. And then the next day, because of the smoke and everything, you have to do it again to change to make it look good again, a kind of cleaning thing. The verb that is used for doing this is the ja verb. And you can see how you are using a brush-like thing to put bits and pieces of some liquid of colored water, maybe, although it might be thicker than just water, to make the earthen stove, to paint the earthen stove, so to say. Okay. And here I'm also just trying to show that you also get a pronominalization of the subject C. Unfortunately, there's a misalignment of my example, but it's okay, one can read it. It's the second line of the bold that is important, the wo ja, eye wo ja, and it dripped. The wo there refers to the first word in the clause, in the sentence actually, the tsi. It says, water started forming and it rained and it dripped. It was not easy. So basically it just says the clouds or something started forming and it fell or it dripped, it poured, and it was not easy. Here again, this is a different one. And again, this is the same problem. You have a word which is just air, and that air can be interpreted as wind depending on the context. So in this case, you can modify this word to say that there was a heavy wind yesterday. You modify it with an adjective and an indefinite article, so to say. And there is one word here that we are going to be hitting and looking at, which is the etso, time permitting. You can also focus the subjects of these things. So G, the G subject, you see in Fon, to say it was thundering, you say something like Jidogbe. No, Hebioso Dogbe. In Eve, if you want to say it is thundering, you talk about the sky, G, Edegbe. It sent out, it takes out its voice. So you can focus it. Oh, what did we just hear? You can say Jiedegbe. So maybe you heard a big thud outside and then you don't know where it came from, and you ask the question, what was that noise? And then somebody can answer Jiedegbe. And that just means there was thunder, so to say. So to summarize, the MPs that denote the elements and the phenomena function as participants in these structures. And when they function as subject, they have the canonical features of subjects in the language. They occur in initial position, they can be modified, they can be pronominalized, they can be focused and questioned, and they participate in various clausal nominations. The verbs that occur in these structures are semantically rich. They participate in verb alternations, and they have a wide range of application beyond the meteorological domain. I leave you to conclude what you want to conclude. In the interest of time, I was going to give you another example of a different language, Tafi, from the Ghana-Togo Mountain Group. But I think I'm just going to, well, maybe the point I should make, and the reason I took Tafi is basically that Tafi and some other GTM languages do have at least one weather word. And it's not a verb, which is important. It is a nominal that names rain. So you have here from Tafi, and you get rain, and there's a verb which is glossed as fall. And you get the same thing for hailing. So you get the hailstone and it falls. So in Tafi, as it were, these nouns name, if you like, the kinds of natural elements, if you like. Now, then there's also dew, which has a name, and then it falls. But you can also say that there was dew, just in this case. And what is interesting about Taffy is also the same thing, that the verbs that can occur in meteorological predications also occur in other areas. So look at this example. You still have the rain here, and it's like the rain is pecking at something. And that is how you talk about drizzling. And why do we say that verb means pecking at? If you look at the second example, this is what you say when the hen is picking at the corn or the corn flour, so to say. So it's the use of a general verb in the domain of meteorology. One question one can ask, we saw the example even of a Fon, where it talks about drizzling in the context of the temps, which is like to send out saliva. Tafi is a Ghana-Togo mountain language, an area in which almost universally, almost all the speakers of Tafi living in Tafi also speak Ewe. And Ewe is the dominant lingua franca. The question can be asked when we get an expression like the one in this example, which has to do with the rain is sending out, removing saliva, which is what it means to say it is drizzling. Remember, there is an there is another term which is more of a Tafi model, if you like. But here we have a kind of Ewe model of drizzling being used, just like so that we get this in Fon, and you come to Ewe, we get it, and now it is sort of like a calque into Tafi. Anyway, so this is where we compare this expression from Tafi with how you say it in Ewe, which is very clear. Water is spitting saliva, or water is removing saliva, literally. And the wind is the same kind of thing that you get, where you get the wind, or wind blows, and you get wind blows. But the main point about this is that you see that you can modify this subject. So the point about this is basically that even though they may seem like naming natural events, natural elements, they are not behaving like abnormal subjects, because you can do various things that you can do to normal subjects with them. And in the case of Tafi, actually, because Tafi is one of these agglutinative languages with a noun class system, and it has agreement, subject-verb cross-reference agreement, these meteorological subjects also participate in the cross-referencing. So they occur in clause in initial position, they are cross-referenced on the verb, they can be modified, they can be focused, and they participate in various clausal nominations. For example, if you want to talk about the blowing of the wind, then you just take the wind and then you reduplicate the verb. So to summarize this whole discussion of meteorological things, the verbs that occur in these structures are semantically rich. The imagery for lightning in Tafi is similar to that represented in Ewe, and not only for lightning, actually. Okay, then the next one is that the construal of drizzling in terms of spitting that occurs in Tafi seems to be based on a calque of similar Ewe expressions, and see also the Fon-français expression. And like other Kwa languages, Tafi and the other GTM languages do not have specific weather verbs. However, Tafi and other GTM languages have specific lexical items for nominals that denote rain. So in Likpe, you talk about the rain as somi, whereas in Ewe and Arakan, there are no specific nouns for rain. Okay, So I want to go briefly to the next point, which has to do with the temporal reference. And I'm going to cut it short because I see the time is flying very much. But actually, the way I'm going to introduce this is to draw on something that Emmanuel Ngwe from Cameroon has done. And I want to first draw your attention to a nice paper he has published in 2019, which has the title, Had Ferdinand de Saussure spoken Wolof or Bassa, the discipline of linguistics would have fared differently. You can read it. It's a nice paper. The basic point he was making is that in many of these languages, there is no distinction between langue or parole, that we are talking about the same thing, or even langage. So the question I keep asking, and which I'm just putting here, and I'm putting it in the context of his paper, is what if linguistics were to be developed based on the analysis of West African languages in the context of, say, the methodological expressions we have looked at? Would we have been spending so much ink and paper on impersonal constructions and whether it means anything or it doesn't mean anything? I leave that question for you to ponder on. But Ngwe also talks about something else. This is also a different paper he gave last year at a Digital Humanities workshop. And basically, he was arguing that African linguistics has been focusing too much on language, and that if we were to go beyond language into what he is calling languaging, but I think what he really means is beyond language as structure and going to language use, we might get something. And I just wanted to, there was one slide in there that he gave, which has to do with conceptual matrix, conceptualizations. And his examples came from Ijoy and from Bassa. Ijoy, Bassa is Bantu, the Ibani is an Ijoy language of Nigeria. Bassa is from Cameroon. And they both have these parallel expressions, which has to do with either be strong or hard, and the complement is head. And what does that mean? And I think all over you will get something like to be wicked. And you get the same expression in Ewe, which is like, you know, be strong in your head or be strong at the head surface, something like that. And you get the same expression. So I'm sure many people who are listening who speak African languages might get parallel expressions like that. And the question is, how do we capitalize on this kind of parallelism? What can we say about it? What does it do? And his idea was that might lead to a development of a kind of conceptual matrix for the languages, as it were, which tells us something about the language use, the way we use the language to talk about various phenomena. Anyway, the other reason why I'm interested in this thing from Ngwe is basically that he shows here for Bassa, as he calls it, the linear representation of time. And you can see that in the middle is a present. And if you go one step, either to the left or to the right, you get to the same word. And you go 2 steps, the same word. You go 3 steps, the same word. You go 4 steps, the same word or expression. So whether you go towards the past or to the future, you get this. And he uses this to make the claim that actually what we have in here is a cyclic representation of time. And so he's he's better at doing this than I am. So he links this, the forward and the backwards, in concentric circles, so to say. So that as you move from the center equidistantly, you do get to each of these things. And so it's not like there is one word on the left and there's another word on the right. It is that you go round that, and that is what that concept is for you. And he gives at the bottom there a kind of the word for time in Bassa, which has to do with coincidence or something like that. The word for time in Ewe and in some of the lower Volta Basin languages is linked to the sun and so on. Or it might be linked to the moon as well. Anyway, so it's not about coincidence in the way that the Bassa system seems to suggest. So with that introduction, I bring you to Ewe, and here is the same kind of thing. As I said, I'm not as good as Emmanuel Ngwe, who can play around with computers and do nice representations. So I'm just going to stick to this linear representation, but you can superimpose upon this the concentric circles. So you go to the right or to the left, and it is etso. The question you want to ask is, okay, so how do you make a difference? Well, very nicely, you can make a difference. You can make a difference with a relative clause. So if it is to the right, that is after to the right, which is in the future, if you like, then you say it is etso, which is coming, and nitso, which is coming. If it is to the left, then you say it is etso, which is past, or nitso, which is past, which has come, gone, so to say, literally. In addition to that, there is a possibility of interpreting whether you are talking about after today or before today. And that is whether you use the potential in your clause. If you say etso anye fida, literally etso, the day after today, then you have the potential marker plus the copula, and then fida is Friday. So tomorrow will be Friday. But if you say etso nye kuda without a potential, then I understand that etso, the day, one day removed from today, is Wednesday. And that I will then interpret as before now. So there are mechanisms for interpreting this. Now the question is this word etso or nitso, are they? We translate etso as today, as tomorrow or yesterday. And we translate nitso actually as the day after tomorrow or the day before yesterday. Actually, there is a nice difference between etso and nitso. Whereas etso is really one day from today, nitso is more than one day from today, because it has more of a vague thing, and you can specify it. So I can say, when we are today, which is Thursday, I can say nitso Sunday. So it is not just 2 days from today, it is days into the future. Similarly, the days past can also be extended. So there is a less restricted interpretation of the frame for that. Whereas the frame for etso is basically 1 day from today. And when I say it that way, I mean that that is the semantics of this word. The semantics is not yesterday or today. The semantics of this word is 1 day from today. And if you have the 1 day from today, it is like 1 day from the point at which you are talking. And then, in a way, what I've just said, which suggests that etso is sort of limited to tomorrow. And indeed, if you see this translation, you might think it like that. But in this saying, which is America menya etso mo, the etso is not just tomorrow, it's sort of the period in the future. So in context, these words take on an understanding. And indeed, in this particular case, as I have translated it here into English, nobody knows tomorrow. The nobody knows tomorrow, the tomorrow is not restricted to tomorrow. It is restricted to a time from tomorrow onwards. So it's the same kind of use that you have of this expression. And here, actually, I found these two expressions in the Eve French dictionary compiled by Rongier. And I thought it was very nice because of the paraphrase he gives later. So in greetings, you can always say, like, tomorrow morning, if you're going to greet somebody, you can always say etsopedo, which is like the thanks for yesterday, basically. And you can also say nitsopedo. And what I like about it is actually the nitsopedo is the one that he really paraphrases it properly. Salutation, quand on ne s'est pas vu depuis 2 ou 3 jours. You see? So it's like, it's not like if you see me tomorrow and you say nitsopedo, that would be inappropriate because we have seen each other today. But the point is that even, and the fact that he says 2 ou 3 makes it open that it could be a few days, even more than 2 ou 3 jours, so to say. So I thought that was a nice parallel to illustrate the difference between etso and nitso. And here is a text example from one of the fictional books, which is very much, I mean, it was a very popular book. The title is Nyazozo, which is Know How to Walk. And it's got all these moral lessons for people. And the principal character is a girl who is being very bad from the moral point of view. She goes around being everything, snatching people's husbands and so on. And at one point, the author was trying to explain how actually she is all over the place. You can never track her down. And so she says, if you hear about her in KJB today, tomorrow, it is only Hohwe that you hear about her from. And KJB and Hohwe are a distance. I mean, at least there's 100 kilometers between them. And then, that is not all. Kasia Nitso. So days after, Nitso. If you ask about her again, you only hear that she's the champion dancer in another place. In, where was that? In Agotime Kwetwe. And Agotime Kwetwe is on the other side of this KJB and Hohwe that he used. So Agotime Kwetwe is in the south, Hohwe is a bit in the center, KJB is more towards the north. So you can see, you can have an idea of the range of these things. So he's trying to show the the kind of, not just the distance difference, but the distance difference reflects the use of egbe, etso, nitso in this way. So in a nutshell, what I'm trying to say is that there is these two words, etso and nitso, which are, if you like, bidirectional, but which do not mean that they co-express ideas like yesterday and tomorrow. They express a unitary concept of one day from today, 2 or more days from today. To finish off, let me quickly go to the singulative problem. So here I've reproduced in a nutshell part of the post that was sent to the linguistic typology list about the singulative. And one of the reasons I put it completely is that there is a definition of singulative in there. So the singulative is a noun form with any marker, inflectional or derivational, that creates a meaning, one or one unit, when added to a base. That is a kind of singulativizing and individuating marker. Bases for singulatives tend to be mass nouns, plurals, collectives of different kinds, general number forms, and sometimes non-nominal bases like adjectives. And then we get 4 examples. One, this is a famous one. I mean, Baiso, Afro-Asiatic from Ethiopia, is a famous example that is used by many people. And in that area, you have a singulative formation. So here you've got a formation, the general number word lions, and then you add something to it, and then you get 1 lion. Russian example is there. Italian. The Italian example is critical because this is the one which illustrates the use of the diminutive as a singulative. So you've got the chocolate in mass, and then when you've got chocolatino, then it's as if it's a chocolate. So that's the diminutive form of chocolate, and then that's what is the thing that is talked about with respect to the diminutive as a singulative. And Welsh is the example there. Now, Silva explains further. These examples show that singulatives occur in different number systems, and they can be productive or unproductive. And as she says, I also include diminutive markers which have a singulative function, as in the Italian case, and talks about the fact that Jufarski calls this the partitive function of diminutives. And yes, I agree with her here. Forms that are singulatives are often not described as such in grammars, especially types 3 and 4. That is the diminutive, and they are harder to find. So this is what I was saying before, that the diminutive in Eve was assigned to this as a singulative. And unfortunately, I think this is based on a mistake. So this is the quote from Heine et al. With respect to this form. So they are talking about the noun vi, as you see. As apart from developing into a derivative suffix, the noun vi has also been grammaticalized to an adjective. And when qualified by the indefinite article ade, it also to an adverb. In both cases, the resulting meaning is little a bit with small in small caps. So these are the two examples from Heine et al. The first example is Mehdi Souklivi. And if there are any Ewe speakers in the audience, I would want them to reflect on this. What does it mean when you hear something like Mehdi Souklivi? If it is Mehdi Souklivi, then I don't see how it will be translated as I want a bit of sugar. In fact, if we read carefully the passage above there, we need an indefinite marker. And if you have an indefinite marker, then I would say that this V is not a diminutive, it is an adjective. So you will have to say Mehdi Soukliviade, V ade. Ade is the indefinite marker. In fact, when we go down to the next example, which is Medo allons vide, the vide there is an adverbial, as they say up there. And actually, the way they put the vide, where you've got either you either say vide or you say vie, these are two dialect differences. And it is true, you could argue there is a kind of grammaticalization chain. And you could argue it comes from vi ade, as in the first example where you need an ade before you can say it's I want a little bit of sugar. So, and that's the critical point I want to make. If you are going to say vi ade, the V there is not a diminutive marker. It is an adjective. And I can see how we go from that as a chain to vie, or before that we get to vide, which is used in the inland dialects for the adverbial form. And it is consistent with adverbial forms ending in de. And then you go one step by, of course, loss of that hard consonant to vie, where the vie becomes consistent as adverbial forms marked with a, and so on. The point I'm trying to make is that because we have this, which unfortunately I think contains a mistake, in a cross-linguistic study, this point is taken and this language is used as an example of using the diminutive for partitive function. And then from there, we are taking it now as a singulative. This is a problem. And so it is important that we cross-check some of these examples. I'm sure that Heine et al. would say that there is a mistake in this here. Anyway, having said that, I think Ewe is very exciting and interesting for a singulative marking. And that's what I'm going to end on. So there is a form qui. Actually, we can start from the form ku, which is like a grain or seed. Now, there is a second diminutive marker, which is just the E, which you get in other places. So if you want to talk about a small gourd, you can either talk about a govi, which is a small gourd, or you can talk about goe, which is go plus this E, which then assimilates to the height of the O, then you get goe. In some dialects, then you get gui. Anyway, this diminutive marker is added to this form qui, a ku, to form qui. And I'm just going to give you 3 examples in the interest of time. So the first one, which I think will be easier for everybody to see, is if you have a broom. And when we talk about our brooms, we are talking about brooms made from oil palm fronds, you know, those single ones that you take away the leaves and then you've got the stalk left and you get a group of that to have a broom. Now, if you want to talk about a broomstick, then you add this qui to it, the ha word. So you get ha qui the ka, one broomstick. You take pe, which can be either stone or rock. You add this qui to it, and then you get a pebble. In fact, there is a kind of landscape form where if you've got a lot of laterite or something in a place, then you might want to say that that is a kpekutse, which is like the kpe, which has produced little outlets of seeds, so to say. That's how you get it. And so when you put the qui on this one, you will get your pebble. And this is the tip of the iceberg. You can say, "Tikui de camela fermo." So there is not a drop of water in the house. Tikui. So on ti, which we saw before, which was rain, in the context of rain, you can just put this thing on it to talk about a drop of water. And I think this form meets the definition that Silva proposed for a singulative. There is a catch with respect to the definition, because this is not an attachment to the noun, although I have to quickly add that there are some nouns which have that as attached to them. So atakwi will be the kind of little seed of tobacco, a type of tobacco, I should say. But this is a particle. And you see you've got, and this qui occurs, if you like, in a noun phrase in the slot where you will get your measure phrases occurring. So if you want to say, for example, one bag of stones, you are going to say pe kotoku the ka. And if you're going to say one pebble, you are going to say pe kui the ka. So that slot is where this qui form occurs. And well, measure phrases and a singulative formative all belong to the same kind of quantifying constructions. So on that note, I'll just say, I hope I have illustrated for you the dangers in our descriptive practices that make us lose sight of those precious pearls, those gems that we are dealing with. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Felix. I don't know if you... Okay.
Yes.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for this fascinating talk. We've had a lot of interaction in the chat.
Okay.
So I would like to thank Mark Tong for getting the chat very lively and asking questions to everyone. You'll see that we have more than 12 examples from various languages about how to express the phenomenon of rain falling.
Very nice.
Mm-hmm. So far, I'm not so sure that we have. So before I tackle the questions, not many of them, mostly remarks, I'd like to say hello to all the people who interacted in the chat and especially to the ones I know, specifically Hilary, James, Sarah, and Sharon, Nej, and Deborah. So thank you, and thank you everyone for all your remarks and questions. So I'm now going to try and get all the information. I'm just scrolling. Okay, so we'll deal with the questions first, and then I'll go back to what everyone proposed as examples. So Sharon Rose says, in connection to expressions such as sky rains, how can you tell that the word for sky has not acquired a secondary meaning as rain and can then be referred to independently?
Thank you, Sharon. Yeah, this is a reasonable time for you to be up, so that's good. Okay, so in this case, it is very clear. It is not just in the rain context that you get it. So you remember that in the Fon, especially, you get the sky, the G coming again in drizzle. Okay, so you might say that is still linked to rain. But if you go to Eve, you get it in the lightning expression, which I started with, and you get it also when it is rain. So it is not rain, and it's not a secondary thing, a secondary meaning. It is that because critically, for you to be able to say it is rain that is involved, you have to have the predicate that it's going with. So remember, when you have a G, in fact, in Eve, we use it for a number of things. So you can use it for this rain, a jija. And in fact, for me not to be accused of hiding data, I said that we use water T for rain. In fact, people would, if you want to really talk about rainwater, they would say a GT, which is sky water, okay? So it is not just the G, which is going to be rain. You need something with it. And the G would also be in the context of lightning, in the context of thunder. And in all those cases, you have particular predicates that go with this one noun to give you these interpretations. So it cannot be that it is rain that is shouting, let me just put it that way, which is the thunder. It is something else. And that is how you want to say that actually it's not a case of secondary meaning or anything. And that from, if you like, a monosemic bias perspective, I mean, the sky is there. So actually, there are other contexts in which you can get the sky interpretation. So the word for moon, for example, is literally sky thing. So the thing in the sky, basically. So if you look at all the contexts of use of this word, it is clear that there is one common denominator, and that is sky, something above us that we can see. And then when things are happening, we can experience it. When things are happening there, and when there are some bodies there, we can experience them. I hope I have clarified your secondary meaning for you.
Okay, thank you. I have another question for you, Felix, from Hilary Chapel. So would you say that the QE individuates rather than singularizes for the relevant examples? Can you add numerals to an NP with QE? Sorry.
Okay, I am happy to say that it's an individuating thing. Remember, as I said, it comes from the word for grain. So if I were to have rice or maize, and I want to talk about one of those grains, I will say moli qui deka. Well, and the question was whether you can have numerals. Let me take a breath. You know, there is something which I wanted to talk about it, but in the interest of time, I didn't want to, because there is a way of constructing kind of plurals or adding numerals to things like mass or general nouns in Ewe, which involves a whole construction involving a unitizer. So I can say, for example, Beli is maize, and I can talk about the kui, which is a grain of maize. I can then say Beli kui deka, and that is fine. That is just one grain of maize. But if I wanted to say something more than one of those, then I will have to say Beli kui, and then I have this construction which uses the plural marker plus a unitizer, a unit counter, which is based on the word for person, which is ame. Then I can put any numeral on it. So I can say Beli kui wame aton, which is like 5 grains of maize. Aton is 5. And then you've got the ame. That ame is the unitizer for anything, for persons and for things. And then you have the plural marker, the wo. So wo ame, X, numeral. And I put that on a qui modified noun. I am fine. I can get my plural. So I am happy to think that it's an individuating thing. But as I showed, the definition that Silva was using has this individuating thing as well as the singularizing thing. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So
thank you, Hilary.
We have also a remark by James Segbe. Are these not inevitable pitfalls for typologists who use published grammars?
Well, they are inevitable. They are inevitable, but at the same time, and remember, I'm not really accusing the typologists. What I'm calling for is we, the grammarians, should do a better job. So James, do a better job, and then we will not have this problem.
Okay, we're having a very lively discussion here. I'm waiting for further questions if you have any. And as far as I'm concerned, I was wondering if what you're aiming at is also to underline the importance of having rich dictionaries and of putting forward the Boasian trilogy and all those methods, rather than elicitation, for instance, which would tend to give the kind of examples that you're criticizing maybe in your talk?
This is a difficult question for me because it is a whole talk I have given before. Well, so let's break it down. What am I calling for? Actually, in this particular talk, I've just been calling for paying attention to details, and what I want to call for more is let the language speak. And if we're going to let the language speak, what that means is we should pay attention to the meanings that are being expressed by the speakers. Now, then you can ask, okay, how do these meanings come about? And yes, that is where we can go beyond the Boasian trilogy, actually. Because with the Boasian trilogy, we are stuck with structure, with a kind of dictionary, which inevitably, as you say, and as we all know, works with contextual translations and not necessarily with the senses, the meanings underlying these forms. But we cannot get away from that important, how do you call that point on the triangle? That important thing which is about the texts, because everything begins and ends and continues in texts. It is, and this is something that we should also bear in mind. Actually, unlike, say, structure, I mean, you see a sentence and you can work out the structure. Unlike that structure, to work out the semantics of an expression, you cannot do it on its face, because meaning is not immediately present. Meaning can only be approached through a study of observed behavior, observed usage of expressions. We cannot just, with one instance of use, conclude that we know the meaning of the thing, because behind that contextual use is a whole array of things. And we need more observation of behavior, discursive behavior of speakers, to be able to work out the meanings as they are. In a way, what we need, if we go from the text, and the way we can enrich the text is to pay attention to cultural activities. Cultural activities, or activity types, as Levinson would call them. These are things that generate for us recurrent patterns of meaning, which we can put in what we might call an ethnothesaurus. And it's the cultural activities that generate for us the things that we can call the ethnography of communication. It's because we have this recurrent pattern. And now, actually, with this kind of mode of communication that we are engaged in, there are new cultural activities leading to new routines that we need to put in our ethnography of communication. So without paying attention to those things, we cannot talk about meanings. And the meanings are only going to be observed from language use. So yes, we'll need to extend, and maybe people who have listened to my Abralin talk, or people who were at the Kolang, actually the two talks I've given with respect to the sort of going beyond the Boisian trilogy are all available online. One in the ILARA archives and one on the Abralin Vivo channel. There I go into the expanded, what David Wilkins calls the communicative pentagon. So you've got the various points, and that's when we talk also about multimodality. And actually, one of the ways you can get at meanings of some of these things, for example, this verb ja that I was talking about, one of the ways we can get at it is when people are talking about it, the kind of gestures that they make with it. It's always this kind of direction. And also, when we are talking about how you disambiguate, or better still, how you contextualize a word like etso or nitso, which has to do with 1 day or 2 or more days removed from today, is also how people point. That's how you will see the bidirectionality that is involved in this kind of expression. So yes, we have to go beyond the trilogy. And when I say this, sometimes then people say, but that's a lot of work. And my answer to that is, yes, it's a lot of work, but we have to go step by step. So I'll be very interested in somebody who does a detailed study of meteorological, environmental expressions of a language. We don't have to go full-scale grammar. Go by these different cultural activities as defined by the culture. And then we get a cumulative description of these things.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. That's a real program and a very interesting and stimulating one. I hope we all get into it, those of us who haven't already started. And I'm looking at the chat, and we have a remark also by James, who says example sentences require glosses, and there's just so much one can squeeze into a gloss.
Oh, James. Well, okay. There's so much one can squeeze into a gloss. Okay, so here is, and it's an important point. A gloss is a shorthand, okay? A gloss is a shorthand. However, and this is the problem, the practice has become that we take glosses as if they are the thing. I'm happy to say, yes, a gloss is a shorthand. So, of course, when I gloss something as, like, for example, when I gloss tea as water, that is a very shorthand in a particular context. And when I say water, I am undercutting myself, because as I pointed out when I was talking, tea is not just water. Tea, if you really want to talk about it, you want to say that it's a kind of fluid, liquid thing. And just like, you know, in the Fon-français dictionary, where the thing that is coming out of your ear, the thing that is coming out of your eyes is also tea, you see. It only happens that when you are talking about that one, you use a word for it, which relates to the eye, together with the tea. And that's what gives you the contextual interpretation. And this is why, in fact, you need, for some of our languages, more and more of the collocations to express the different meanings that people are talking about. So yes, a gloss is a shorthand. And yes, we shouldn't take a gloss, and maybe that's more the point. We shouldn't take the gloss as representing meaning. A gloss is just a stepping stone to help us work out on the surface what is happening. However, and this is what I meant by a descriptive practice that makes us endanger the genius of these languages, these glosses are the things that are betraying us because they undercut what these words stand for. And the shorthand, yes. So where is the long hand going to be? This is where we need that other ethnothesaurus to show us the links. And maybe the other thing I should just say, I mean, and this is a thing that guides part of my work every time, is something that Igor Melchuk says. He says, it's not just every language, but every word of a language is an entire world in itself. So yes, if we give a gloss, it is only a pointer to a whole world. And so long as we remember that, then we are not just going to take something from a grammar with its gloss and say that is what this language does. That is what I'm fighting for, against.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you very much for clarifying this for us. And I think many native speakers of languages relate to what you're saying and what you're presenting, what you presented in the talk. Are there other questions in the chat? I'm wondering if I should read I think it's best if I keep the chat for you, Felix, because there are many examples of in many languages of whether verbs and whether expressions rather than verbs.
Thank you. So, yes, I'd want them. Yes.
So I'll just keep them for you. If and you have answers from Sharon and Hilary, thanking you for your answers. And well, if there's no other question, if there is one that I missed, but I think they were all remarks rather than questions, please don't hesitate to ask it again in the chat in the few seconds. In the few coming seconds. Just look up. Elvis Rescue is asking, will a 4-tier glossing then be recommended?
Hey, thank you, Elvis from Ghana. A 4-tier, well, so the way, actually, I don't know what you mean by 4-tier glossing. So if you saw the examples I was giving, if you look at the Taffy examples, for example, they are in 4 layers. And yes, one of the things that we have done with respect to, so if you use Flex or any of these things, is to have a tier for something like the pronunciation, and then you get a kind of morphemic line, which then gives you more or less a kind of orthographic and morphemic glossing. And then we get a gloss, and then we get a free translation. Actually, maybe indeed, and this is possible in Elan and so on, maybe we need other tiers to come in. So maybe it's not just a 4-level glossing that we need. We probably need a few more, maybe at least one more, which at least indexes things about the terms that we have glossed. So if I have a gloss of water, maybe it will be useful in the context that it is combining with something like ja. Maybe it will be useful on a different tier to spell out that, yes, the context of this is, say, meteorology. Just as an example. Maybe that would be a useful tier to add so that we combine these 2 tiers. So then if I see these 2 tiers and then you tell me rain, then I'm a bit more comfortable because I see there is a combination of water and a kind of frame. Yes, maybe this is where the semantic frames come in actually. So we have a certain semantic frame for the use of this word. And then we know that in that semantic frame, this is the interpretation that we are going to get. And that's, so when I get to a free translation, which says rain falls, then I'm happy. But if I just move from water to rain falls, then I'm not happy because I think that is misrepresenting the language form.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you very much. I think there's also the question of having examples extracted from texts, for instance, because if you have a whole corpus or a whole text in Elan or Toolbox, then you try to be consistent with your glossing and so on. But when you use the example as an illustration for in a paper or in a grammar, you tend to change a little bit the glossing, or so that it's clearer for the reader. And then this probably is also one of the problems.
Yes, and maybe what we need to do is to pay attention and pay homage to context. So we should provide more context, even if we take it from a text. It's not necessarily that we have to be twisting things. We have to give the context. So again, this could be, a kind of tier in the example area where we give a bit more context for the interpretation, because we know that we can only interpret things in context. So I think that would be, and yes, I agree. And this is, I invite people to really reflect on what this kind of thing means. I've tried to point out some dangers in our shorthand way of doing things. Maybe we should reflect on how we can improve our shorthand way of doing things such that we do not put the languages in danger. The genius of the languages are in danger, even if the language itself is not endangered.
Thank you very much. I think those are beautiful final words for today's conference. So, and I don't think there are any other questions really. So I would like to thank you, Felix, for your willingness to accept our invitation. Your talk was fascinating. I would like also to thank all the people who watched us and interacted through the chat. I unfortunately cannot name them all, but they will be on the chat, on the live chat forever. So thank you, all of you, for your questions, especially our friends from West Africa who attended, and all the Africanists who were massively here today. Thank you very much. And to all of you who watched this video, this live stream, I would like to tell you that we'll meet again next Thursday at 8 p.m. as well. And this time to explore some extraordinary languages of Europe spoken in the Caucasus with Professor Bernard Comrie from the University of California at Santa Barbara. So thank you all and see you next Thursday.